It begins with the soft hush of a moonlit tide brushing against abandoned stones along an unnamed coast. A silver quiet lies over everything, as though the night itself has paused to listen. Out beyond the reach of the wind, where the water folds into itself like a slow breath, the world feels older, gentler, almost aware. It is said that on certain nights, when the moon leans low enough to graze the horizon, the shoreline reveals what daylight conceals. And tonight, in that pale glow, something stirs beneath a veil of drifting sand. A carving, not loud or proud, but subtle, weathered until it resembles a memory more than a mark. A single curved ship emerges from the stone. Its hull is gently arched, elegant in the way that ancient things always are, shaped by hands that believed wood could carry prayers. Along its side are faint silhouettes, sailors once carved with care, now blurred into shadows by centuries of salt and tide. The sea sighs against the rock, touching the engraving as though greeting an old companion. Whispers tell us that this shoreline was never named on any map. Beneath the silence, beneath the drifting sand, there lies the trace of a people whose story grew thin before it ever grew loud. And the night invites us closer. The deepening mystery, drifting through lost ports as we follow the moonlit path along the coast. The air gathers a soft chill. Not the cold of fear, but the cold of recognition. The sensation that something forgotten is remembering itself. Farther inland, half-buried pillars rise like broken teeth from the sand. They lean toward the ocean, as though listening to its murmur. Some believe these ruins once framed the entrance to a harbor long vanished. Others claim they were ceremonial arches, gates through which only chosen voyagers step before surrendering their names to the tide. No records remain, only stone, only silence. Only the outline of a forgotten port, swallowed by salt and centuries. In the hush of the night, we wander through what remains. A scatter of pottery shards glints beneath a film of sand. Frayed ropes lie fossilized in the dust, threads hardened into brittle spirals. The faint skeleton of a pier stretches toward the water. Now a line of ghostly posts, worn down to smooth stumps. It is said this place was once alive with lanterns. Soft flames reflected on calm waters. Bronze bells chiming in the wind. Fishermen whispering blessings before pushing off into the dark. The ocean, to these forgotten ones, was not merely a path. It was a spirit, vast, breathing, unpredictable, forgiving only to those who walked with humility. They called it many names, though none have survived. And yet, if one listens, truly listens, the tide still murmurs as though speaking them. A people who sailed beyond the rim as we drift deeper into the ruins. A quiet understanding brushes against us. These mariners, whoever they were, did not sail for conquest. Their carvings show no weapons, no trophies, no kings demanding tribute. Instead, they show spirals, waves, stars and circles, symbols of cycles, of journeys without ends. It is whispered that this people believed the horizon was a threshold, a thin membrane between worlds. To cross it was not a challenge, but an offering. They prepared for voyages, as one prepares for sacred rites. Imagine it now. Torches flickering against stone walls. Saltwater bowls set before small carved altars. Priests, or perhaps simply elders, tracing spirals on the foreheads of departing sailors. They never spoke their destinations, not aloud, not even to one another. Some say they believed that a spoken intention could weigh the boat down, anchoring it to the mundane world. Only silence kept the vessel light. Only faith kept the wind willing. And so, their maps, those that remain, hold lines that begin boldly, then fade into emptiness. Ink dissolving into blank parchment, as though the cartographers themselves surrendered to mystery. Perhaps they did. Perhaps they meant to. Rituals of light and water. There is a legend, soft as mist, barely held together by rumor, that before launching into the night, these mariners performed a ritual unlike any other. Along the shoreline, dozens of lanterns were placed in gentle arcs, forming a crescent of earthly stars. Each lantern was inscribed with a symbol, some simple, some impossibly intricate. When the tide reached its highest breath, the sailors would lift the lanterns and cast them into the sea. Not to sink, but to float, a drifting constellation. Witnesses, few, uncertain, half-dreamt, claimed the lanterns seemed to guide the ships, curling around them like quiet guardians, until both ship and fame dissolved into the horizon. The ritual was never written down, and perhaps that was the point. Some ceremonies exist only in motion, vanishing as soon as they are performed, like a prayer bird into a passing wind. Salt and silence. Echoes of vanished lives back along the coast, the stone ship carving waits under the moonlight. The faces of its crew are gone, but their presence lingers like aftertaste, subtle, persistent. It is here, among these faint lines, that the truth presses gently against us. These sailors left nothing behind that carries their names. No graves, no inscriptions, no lineage that claims them. The ocean has taken all of it, carrying it far beyond any horizon we can see. Perhaps they wanted it that way. Perhaps they believed that to name a thing too firmly was to imprison it. Or perhaps time, tireless and patient, simply continued its quiet erosion. Still, something in the air suggests more than erasure. Something like intention, something like surrender. It is said the ocean keeps what it loves. And these mariners, it seems the ocean loved deeply enough to keep every trace. Pilgrimage into the unknown. As we gaze upon the shredded remains of their world, a melancholy settles like dusk. Because their journeys were not merely physical, they were inward. A slow exhale of identity, a soft peeling away of all that could tether them to certainty. To sail beyond the mapped world was to step into a space both real and sacred, where answers dissolved and only questions remained. Why did they go? Where did they hope to arrive? What did they seek in the folds of the vast breathing sea? Perhaps they searched for a place where the earth bent closer to the sky. Perhaps they sought communion with the spirit they believed dwelled beneath the waves. Or perhaps the voyage was their destination, the movement itself the purpose. Some voices only echo when we are ready to listen. And tonight, the echo is soft, like a hand brushing our sleeve. The fade into silence, the night deepens. The moon slips behind a drifting veil of cloud, turning the silvered world to soft charcoal. The ocean continues its steady breathing. We stand before the carving, the ship, the shadows of its crew, and something gentle shifts inside us. A recognition that not every story seeks to be understood. Some simply wish to be felt. The tide rises slightly, reaching farther up the shore, lapping at the base of the stone. For a moment, the carving disappears beneath a thin sheet of water, and when the wave retreats, the figures seem fainter, as though the sea is slowly reclaiming them, line by line. Perhaps it was never meant to be found. Perhaps its reappearance tonight is nothing more than the ocean exhaling fragments of memory into the moonlit dark. The wind softens. The waves hush themselves. And all that remains is a lingering whisper carried across the tide. A whisper telling us that some voyages do not end, some names are not lost but released, and some stories, like the ocean, exist only in the spaces between breaths. The night folds around us like a gentle cloak, and the sea keeps whispering. The compass forged from starlight. It begins with a hush so complete that even the wind seems to hesitate. In a forgotten clearing beneath a sky veiled with drifting clouds, a faint shimmer glides across an altar drowned in dust. It is said that this altar once marked the edge of an ancient shoreline, though the sea has long since withdrawn, leaving only memory to lap at its stones. Yet tonight, beneath the softened breath of constellations, something gleams there. A relic that seems almost aware of its own solitude. A compass, but not one meant for any earthly traveler. Its bronze frame is dulled by centuries, yet the crystal set within it holds a glow that refuses to fade. When the clouds part even for a heartbeat, the compass seems to awaken, its needle turning not north but skyward, shivering at the presence of distant stars. Upon its dial, softened spirals rise like trails left by meteor dust, lines looping inward, then outward again, as though charting the movement of celestial tides. Whispers tell us the first to find it in recent memory was a wanderer seeking only shelter, a traveler who stepped between broken pillars in search of a moment's rest, only to feel the air shift around this abandoned altar. And perhaps it was not curiosity, but instinct. Some ancient chord vibrating in the quiet of the heart that drew their gaze to the relic glimmering beneath a layer of sand. For it is said that certain objects do not wait to be found. They wait to be remembered. And so our chapter opens, beneath a restless sky with a compass whose needle trembles not toward land or harbor, but toward the heavens themselves. The brotherhood of tides and constellations. As the traveler brushes dust away, the story loosens itself from the shadows. A soft unfurling, like parchment warmed by breath. Long ago, so long that even the myths have grown tired of trying to describe it, there existed a maritime brotherhood who believed the stars were not merely lights, but living messengers. They called themselves the Watchers of the Open Sky, though some older texts hint that their name once carried a deeper resonance, something like those who read the night's pulse. Their ships were not built for conquest or trade. They sailed the sacred waters the way monks walk the cloisters of a temple. Imagine, if you will, the decks of these vessels, soft-lit sanctuaries beneath the vault of night. Bronze lanterns swayed gently, not to illuminate the way forward, but to mirror the slow rhythm of the waves. Robed navigators stood in meditation at the bow, not reading winds, but listening, always listening. To them, the sky breathed, and in each breath was a message. It is said that each member of the Brotherhood carried a fragment of star map inked onto their sleeves. Not a map of geography, but a map of revelation. Certain constellations were believed to open the gates between earthly paths and spiritual ones. Certain alignments signaled that the sea itself would rise or calm in sympathy. And at the heart of their faith was this compass, the one now resting on a forgotten altar, forged from bronze drawn from the sea cliffs, its crystal dial said to be carved from a fallen star. Some legends claim it was shaped during a moment when the heavens themselves dimmed, as though offering a piece of their own brilliance. Others say it was crafted in prayer, each line etched into its spiral dial during nights of silence so deep that the artisans could hear their own heartbeat echoing back from the sea. Yet whatever truth lies hidden beneath the sand of time, one thing remains constant. The Brotherhood did not use this compass to find shores. They used it to find truths. The search for revelation. There are stories, soft, drifting stories, of nights when the compass was lifted by steady hands toward the moon. Some believe the navigators did this not to read direction, but to offer the instrument back to the sky from which it was born. Under silver light, the dial's spirals shimmered, gathering reflections of distant constellations. Sometimes the needle quivered, as if acknowledging a distant voice. These were not the trembling gestures of metal responding to magnetism. No, these were the subtle responses of an artifact awakened. It is said the Brotherhood gathered on their ship decks in silent circles whenever the compass stirred. A hush would fall across the water. Even the waves seemed to listen. And in that stillness, they would wait for insight, for whisper, for whatever breath the sky was willing to share. Some nights, the compass needle aligned with a star barely visible. Other nights, it pointed into darkness, toward a patch of sky unlit and unknowable. But the Brotherhood cherished both moments equally. To them, light and shadow were not opposites, but companions, guiding them across sacred waters. In their journals, few of which survived, the navigators often wrote of following the star you cannot see, trusting that revelation traveled not in certainty, but in surrender. The compass was not meant to guide the hand. It was meant to open the heart. And so their voyages were never quests for land. They were pilgrimages upon the living sea, rituals of the night sky. When the moon rose high and the horizon blurred with silver, the Brotherhood performed their most sacred rite. The compass was placed at the center of a woven circle made from strands of dried seagrass, harvested during the first tide of spring. Around this circle, the navigators knelt, hands resting lightly on the deck, palms open towards the sky. They believed that every star held a voice, and that some were meant only for the quiet. Some, they said, only echo when we are ready to listen. The ritual unfolded slowly, deliberately. One navigator would place a hand over the compass. Another would breathe a prayer into the night. A third would tilt their head toward the heavens, listening for what lay between the silence. And sometimes, only sometimes, the compass would respond. Its needle would dance, just once. A soft flicker toward a constellation no larger than a grain of salt. A gentle tremble toward a forgotten region of sky. Those were the moments the Brotherhood treasured most, not because they understood them, but because they felt them. The compass is lost, then found. The stories say that the Brotherhood vanished without a trace. Their ships, which once glided like drifting temples across the water, were swallowed by time or tide. Some believe they sailed into storms seeking revelation and never returned. Others whisper that they found what they sought, and their return to the earthly realm was simply no longer necessary. As centuries unfolded, the compass disappeared. It slipped beneath waves, or into vaults, or into silence, until now, when the wanderer found it on an altar abandoned to moss and memory. Perhaps something in the world exhaled. Perhaps the sky recognized its own. The compass's needle rose as if remembering the purpose it once held, trembling softly at the whisper of constellations hidden behind drifting cloud. And for a moment, brief as a heartbeat, the wanderer felt something shift. Not in the sky, not on the earth, but somewhere deep within. Because there are relics that point outward, to places and paths and horizons. And there are relics that point inward, to the places we have forgotten to look. This compass, forged from starlight, belonged to both realms. The fade into silence. Now imagine the traveler standing alone before that weathered altar. The clouds drift like slow-moving veils. A faint shimmer moves across the compass crystal. Somewhere, far away, a star pulses behind an ocean of air. The needle shifts. Slow, gentle, deliberate. Not toward a direction, not toward an answer, but toward a feeling. And perhaps this is the secret the Brotherhood always knew, that the sky does not guide us to destinations. It guides us to understanding. That stars do not point to places. They point to truths. And that some tools, especially those made of bronze and crystal and silence, were crafted not for the hands, nor for the world, but for the quiet chambers of the heart. The wanderer breathes in. The compass trembles once more. And the sky, thick with drifting clouds, holds its breath, as though waiting for the world to soften. Perhaps the compass was never meant to be found. Perhaps it appears only when one is ready to listen. And as the night deepens and the hush grows thicker, its purpose dissolves back into mystery. A needle pointing skyward, an altar forgotten, a relic humming with distant constellations, and a question that settles like falling dust. What if some journeys begin not with a step, but with a star that remembers your name? And in that lingering wonder the chapter fades, quiet as starlight, soft as breath, leaving the listener suspended between waking and dream. Night has its own geography, a map not drawn on parchment or stone, but on the soft and shifting continents behind closed eyes. Some lands appear for only a heartbeat, fleeting as a candle smoke. Others return again and again, mysterious as a half-remembered lullaby. And then, there are places that belong only to dreams, not myths, not stories, but realms that exist just beyond waking, as if the world itself once knew them and hasn't entirely forgotten. Tonight, Dara, I'll tell you of one such realm, the island that appeared only in dreams, a land whispered about by ancient navigators, monks of twilight temples, and wanderers who spent too long gazing into the horizon where the sky sinks into the sea. For some called it Nimarathe. Some called it the Isle of Returning Echoes. And some simply called it home. Long before scrolls and kingdoms, before compasses and star charts, the world belonged to those who dared close their eyes and drift into the mysterious theater of sleep. In those early nights, the great dreamers, Shamans, poets, and seers all spoke of the same thing. A place impossible, gentle and strange. An island with shores that shimmered like the inside of a pearl trees that hummed softly, as though remembering songs from other lifetimes, wind that carried not air but memories. No boat ever reached it. No map ever marked it. Yet every sleeper who wandered deep enough into their own slumber found its coastline waiting for them. Familiar, as if carved in the bones. The dreamers believed this island was older than the world, a leftover piece of the creation that gods and stars had misplaced. But others thought differently. They believed the island wasn't a place of the past, but a place of the possible. A world dreaming itself through humans. A seed of destiny. Centuries later, when kingdoms rose in dust and fell in dustier silence, there lived a guild of mariners known as the Tidebound. Their ships were slim as moon crescents and carved with runes of wandering. While others learned to read tides, they learned to read dreams. Because every tidebound sailor, without exception, had once dreamed of the island. One such sailor was Mireille, a quiet woman with hair the color of the storm-washed iron. Her dreams were not like the others. While most saw the island from afar, Mireille walked deep into its glimmering forests. Each dream began the same way. She stands on a white shore made of crushed moonlight. The trees ahead sway gently, whispering her name. The air tastes like the first breath of a newborn world. And in every dream, she hears something. A heartbeat, soft but steady, pulsing beneath the ground, as if the island itself were alive. The elders of her guild believed she would one day be the first to find the island in waking life. But Mireille knew the truth. Some destinies do not unfold on maps. In another age, in a far-off empire, whose name time has since swallowed, a young prince struggled with nightmares. His palace healers burned incense, recited sutras, and summoned wise astronomers. But nothing soothed him. Every night he would wake breathless, whispering, "The island calls me." He described it perfectly. The pearl shores, the humming trees, the sky with pale gold clouds shaped like drifting lanterns. His council feared he was cursed. His mother feared he was blessed. So she summoned the oldest scholar in the empire, a man whose eyes were restless, as if he carried entire libraries behind him. The scholar listened to the prince's descriptions and nodded solemnly. "You dream of Nimaradi. You are not cursed. You remember, Dean. Remember what?" the prince asked. "That the world," said the scholar, "was once larger than it is. Before oceans cracked and continents drifted, there were islands that existed only in the border between waking and sleeping. Some vanished, some hid, some chose to be found only by the hearts that needed them." The prince asked if the island was real. The scholar smiled gently. Everything dreamed by enough souls becomes real. The prince dreamed of it until his final day, but he never reached it. Yet he left behind scrolls describing its landscapes in exquisite detail. These scrolls would one day inspire explorers, philosophers, and children who stared from their windows and longed for something more than the ordinary. In a small fishing village by the warm southern sea, there lived an old man named Naran. He had no titles, no scrolls, no ships. Only one thing made him uncommon. He had visited the Dream Island every night of his life. As a boy, he played beneath its glowing trees. As a youth, he walked along its shining cliffs. As an old man, he sat with the island's quiet heartbeat and felt less alone. But one night, something changed. When he reached the island, he saw a young girl sitting on a stone, crying softly. She told him her name was Sarai, and that she too visited the island. "But I don't understand why," she whispered. "Why does this place call us? What does it want?" The old man smiled. "Not everything that calls wants something." She shook her head. "Then why does it appear only in dreams?" Naran looked out across the shimmering bay, where the water glowed like captured starlight. "Because the waking world is too small for some truths," he said, "and too noisy. But here in dreams we hear what the world forgets, that we are more than what daylight makes us." When the girl grew up, she became one of the greatest poets of her age. She wrote of the Dream Island, describing it so vividly that entire generations believed it might be real. Some even sailed, searching for it. None found it. But they all returned changed. Across the ages, countless dreamers reached Nimarathe. But none understood it fully. Some believed it was a refuge for tired souls. Some believed it was a birthplace of forgotten gods. Some believed it was a memory of a world that could have been. But the truth was far simpler, whispered only once, to Mirael the mariner on the night her dreams finally deepened into clarity. She stood at the center of the island, where the heartbeat she always heard throbbed strongest. The trees parted, revealing a stone altar made not by hands but by time and longing. A voice rose, not spoken but felt. "You come here because you forget yourselves in daylight." She trembled. "What are you?" "I am the echo of what humans lose. Memories of gentleness, dreams abandoned, paths never walked, love never spoken aloud, courage never tried. The island pulsed with a quiet sorrow. I am what remains. The world dreams me because it must not forget itself." And then Mirael understood. The island was not a place. It was not a myth. It was not a destination. It was an anchor for the human spirit. A sanctuary, woven from all the possibilities humanity once dared to imagine. When she woke, she held the memory gently. Not as a secret, but as a gift. And she never felt lost again. As centuries rolled like tides, fewer people dreamed deeply enough to reach Nimarathe. Cities grew loud, nights grew bright with lanterns, then lamps, then screens. The world filled with noise, and the small quiet door between waking and dreaming shrank until it became nothing more than a crack. Some say the island faded. Some say humanity forgot it. Some say it still waits, patient as the night itself. The silent oars of the southern sea. That on certain nights, when the moon hangs low and pale over the southern sea, the water remembers. It remembers in small ways, through the faint quiver of a tide, the soft sigh of a wandering current, the distant creak of wood that no ship carries anymore. Some listeners claim they have heard it, the soul rhythmic groan of oars dipping into water long after the vessels themselves have dissolved into silt. If such sounds are real, then perhaps they belong not to the living, but to memory itself. A memory older than maps, older than empire, older even than the languages we use to name the world. For this story begins at the edge of silence. And silence, in this place, was once a way of life. Imagine a bay at the world's far southern edge, a curve of dark stone and pale sand where mist lingers like an old guardian. The moon pools its light across the shallows. Nothing moves but the slow exhale of the tide. The world feels paused, as if time itself is listening. Here, in this quiet cove, ancient mariners once gathered. They left behind almost nothing. No cities, no anchored pillars, no tall monuments carved for future eyes. Only the imprint of their craft remains. Faint grooves etched into the limestone shore, each one shaped like the cradle of a long-forgotten boat. And if you stand still long enough, some say you can feel a weight in the air. A soft expectancy, as though something is waiting to be remembered. For this was the place where the silent oars were born, an order of mariners whose devotion to the sea was expressed not in words, but in the absence of them. They believed the ocean heard everything, every boast, every fear, every careless thought. To speak at sea was to disturb the great listener. To remain silent was to show reverence. Thus, when they rowed, they did so without a single breath out of place. Dozens of arms moving, dozens of oars dipping, rising, dipping again, all in a rhythm so smooth it felt summoned rather than practiced. From the cliffs, their vessels must have looked like shadow saws sliding across a mirror. Whispers tell us that their boats were unlike any others known in those ancient days. Long and narrow, carved from single trees older than memory, the hulls bore symbols of crescents arranged in spirals, half moons turned inward as though listening to one another. Along the bow, masked figures were carved, faces neither human nor animal, gazing forward with expressions of quiet vigilance. Their eyes were hollow, their mouths sealed. Some believe these masks represented guardians meant to watch the horizon. Others think they were reminders, gentle warnings to the crew of the vow of silence they carried. But beneath the carvings, beneath the tools and the timber and the varnished sheen of sea salt, there was something else. A devotion woven into every fiber. For these sailors were not explorers in the way we might imagine. They sought no conquest. They claimed no lands. They carried no banners of kings. They moved through the world as listeners, believing that the sea whispered truths too delicate for the noisy earth to hear. And so they rowed, out beyond the reefs, where the night deepens into indigo, past the last glow of the known coastline, farther, always farther, until the stars were their only companions. It is said some reached coasts that would not appear on human maps for thousands of years. Fragments of wood-bearing crescent symbols have been found on distant islands, so far apart that no known civilization of the age could have ever linked them. And yet the symbols match. The carvings match. The wood itself, foreign to the islands, matches. This suggests one quiet truth. The silent oars did indeed travel farther than any mariner of their time dared to dream. But how? How did crews of dozens move in such perfect unity across such unforgiving waters? The answer, perhaps, lies in the silence itself. In forgotten scrolls and second-hand chronicles, there are brief mentions, small, passing notes, of a southern people who spoke only with their breath. Their communication was said to be ritualistic, almost musical, a language made from the rhythm of inhaling and exhaling. No consonants, no syllables, only gentle currents of air. Some historians dismissed this as poetic exaggeration. Others wonder if it was the key to their unity. For on the open water, A single voice can scatter attention. A single shout can fracture rhythm. But breath is universal. Breath is the first language humans ever knew. Perhaps their silence was not silence at all, but a deeper form of listening to the sea, to each other, to themselves. Rowers aligned their strokes to the soft pulse of their own lungs. Boats drifted with the hidden breathing of the ocean. In this way, the mariners moved as one body, not many. The devotion required for such unity must have been immense. To surrender one's voice to a vow older than memory is no small offering. It is said some spent years training before ever touching an oar. They learned to sit with the tide, to match its rhythm, to watch shadows shift across the shallows, to sense the approaching change in weather through intuition instead of words. By the time they boarded the great crescent vessels, their silence was not an effort. It was a homecoming. As thick mists rose from the southern sea, the silent fleet slipped into their cover like ghosts. Their routes are lost, no maps remain, and no records trace their distant landfalls. But oral traditions scattered across the ocean's rim hint at their presence. On one island, elders speak of strangers who arrived without a sound and left a carved stone in the sand. On another, fishermen still tell stories of boats that glided across the water so quietly that even the birds failed to take notice. In a remote inlet, a crescent-marked oar was discovered, preserved beneath centuries of coral and silt. Perhaps these are coincidences. Or perhaps they are the sea's breadcrumbs, small, sacred clues to a path long erased. We may never know how far the silent oars traveled, what new stars they charted, what distant peaks they glimpsed, what secrets they carried home beneath their sealed lips. But we can imagine it. A fleet moving across a moonlit expanse, each boat a dark silhouette against the silver water. Oars dipping in perfect unison, forming ripples that shimmer and fade. Masts carved onto the prow watching forward, unblinking. And the night sky, a vast cathedral above them, they're listening to their breath-bound prayers. Eventually, as with all things touched by time, the silent oars vanished, whether lost to storm, absorbed into other cultures, or dissolved through slow erosion of tradition. No one knows. Their coves lie empty now. Their boats have become dust. Their voices, if they ever truly existed, have become part of the wind that sweeps across the southern waters. But the silence they carried, that remains. It lingers in the rhythm of the tide, in the stillness just before dawn, in the faint creak heard by those who stand alone on forgotten shores. Some believe the sea keeps their pattern, that the ocean itself remembers the cadence of their strokes. Others think the silence was the map they followed all along. A map not drawn on parchment, but written into the spaces between waves, the breath between stars. And perhaps that is how we should leave them. Not with answers, not with certainty, but with a soft, drifting wonder. For some voices only echo when we are quiet enough to listen. So as the moon hangs low over the southern sea, and the tide whispers its ancient hymn, pause for a moment. Let the world grow still. Let silence settle around you. And if the night is gentle, and your heart is unhurried, you may hear it. That faint, distant rhythm. Oars, moving in perfect unity across a sea that has never forgotten them. Perhaps it was never meant to be fully understood. Perhaps their silence was not a mystery to be solved, but an invitation. A reminder that some truths emerge only when words fall away. And so we drift softly into the quiet they left behind. The lighthouse that guided no one home. That on a far-flung cliff where the land surrenders itself to the endless breathing of the sea, a solitary tower still stands, weather-beaten, salt-scarred, and shaped by centuries of unbroken wind. It rises like the last spine of a forgotten creature, one that once guarded the boundary between the known world and the dreaming deep. Some call it a lighthouse. Others call it a monument. A few, in the old villages, will only refer to it in a whisper, as if naming it too clearly might stir it back to life. But there is one truth all seem to agree on. Its lantern never burned. And yet, for ages, sailors swore that they saw its light. At dusk, when the tide drags long silver ribbons across the rocks, the lighthouse casts a silhouette against the amber sky. A jagged spindle of stone, half drowned in shadow, half crowned in dust. Its lantern chamber is shattered, open to the sky like a hollow eye. The spiral stair inside has long since choked with drifting sand and wind-carved debris. Moss clings to its base like an ancient memory refusing to fade. Below it, the sea moves with a restless, murmuring breath. For those who linger too long, the waves seem to speak, not in words, but in the slow and steady rhythm of something trying to remember itself. Some evenings, when the air is particularly still, the tower appears less like a ruin and more like a sentinel, waiting for a command lost to centuries. And it is here that the story begins, with a lighthouse whose purpose has always been shrouded in silence, with a beacon that never shone, yet somehow guided countless souls. Wetwas tell us that sailors of the ancient world believed this tower was born from the sea itself, not built by hands but revealed, like a memory rising from beneath the waves after millennia of burial. They claimed its stones held the imprint of something older than any kingdom, older even than the scripts that once mapped the world. In forgotten logbooks, written in faded ink and trembling script, mariners described approaching the cliff on nights thick with fog. They recorded seeing a glow, faint, steady, impossible, hovering like a guardian above the darkened teeth of stone. Yet no flame was ever found. No soot, no char, no remnants of fuel. Only emptiness. Scholars tried to explain it away. They argued it must have been moonlight, or the reflection of stars on waves, or the shimmering phosphorescence of drifting plankton. But those explanations never quieted the old sailors, for in every account, the light behaved the same, unwavering, fixed, and utterly impossible. Beneath the silence of history, another story emerges, one less concerned with truth and more devoted to wonder. It is said the lighthouse never guided ships home. Instead, it guided them away, away from storms, away from reefs, away from waters where tides tangled like serpents, away from the call of something deep and unfriendly. Some believed the light was not really a light at all, but a message carried through imagination, an instinct awakened in the hearts of those who traveled too far, too long. A reminder that sometimes survival comes not from what we see, but from what we feel when the world grows dim. The keepers who tended a flame that never was legends tell of keepers who once lived within the lighthouse walls. Figures who climbed the spiral stair, not to ignite a lantern, but to perform something more ritualistic. In the oldest lore, they carried bowls of seawater to the top chamber, letting droplets fall onto the cold stone floors or while chanting songs that no language today can claim. Some say these keepers never tended fire because their duty was not to create light, but to honor it. They maintained silence. They listened to winds older than time. They watched the horizon the way monks watch the turning of constellations. Their presence itself was a kind of illumination. And in the darkest winters, when waves struck the cliff like thunder trying to split the earth, the keepers held vigils, waiting for a radiance that only those lost at sea could see. Whether these keepers were real or merely woven into the cloth of storytelling, no one knows. Their rooms lie empty now, dust layered so thick that footsteps disappear almost instantly. A small basin carved into the stone suggests water once played a role in old rituals. But beyond that, the truth dissolves like mist at dawn. Stories of sailors who saw what was never there. Among the most haunting tales are the ones shared quietly in harbour taverns by sailors who lived long enough to retire. Men with weathered faces, eyes clouded by sun and memory, voices softened by things they no longer dared to explain. These stories do not speak of a shining beacon. They speak of an absence, a darkness that felt full, a void that seemed to hum, a presence that guided without revealing itself. One ancient mariner described the experience as following a path carved into the wind. Another said it felt like being held by an unseen hand and gently turned towards safety. And one, trembling as he spoke, claimed that the lighthouse did not send its light outward. It drew the sailors' own light back to them, reflecting their will to survive. Perhaps that is why the structure became sacred. Not because it illuminated the sea, but because it illuminated something within the travelers themselves. A monument more than a beacon. Over the centuries, the tower became less a tool and more a symbol. Pilgrims traveled to its base not to understand navigation, but to understand longing. The lonely structure came to represent a paradox at the heart of human wandering. Home is not always the place we return to. Sometimes it is the place we finally let go. The lighthouse, perched at the edge of the world, reminded sailors that journeys often end not where we expect, but where we are quietly ready to rest. It stood not to welcome them back, but to release them into new horizons, into different lives, into the slow surrender of aging bones and peaceful sleep. Some even believe that the lighthouse held the collective sighs of thousands of travelers who once passed beneath its shadow. They imagined that every grain of sand in its stairwell was a memory left behind by someone who chose the open sea over the comfort of returning home. And perhaps that is why it still stands, why time has refused to claim it entirely. It is less a ruin and more a repository of stories that no one fully remembers, yet everyone somehow feels. Now, as night deepens and the world softens, the lighthouse remains where it has always been, Nalan, quietly watching the restless sea, its silhouette blending into the star-marked sky. No light burns in its chamber. No keepers walk its halls. No sailors chart their course by its glow. And yet, if you listen deeply enough, if you let your breath slow to match the rhythm of the waves, you might sense something faint in the air, a presence, a memory, a gentle pull, like the echo of a lantern that never existed, but always mattered. Perhaps its greatest purpose was never to guide travelers back to the familiar. Perhaps it was built to remind wanderers that being lost is sometimes the first step toward peace. Perhaps the lighthouse itself understood that home is not a destination, but a quiet acceptance that settles in the heart when the journey finally softens. Some believe the tower still glows, but only in dreams. Others say its light appears only to those who do not seek it. And a few insist that its radiance was never meant for eyes at all. It is said that there are voices which only echo when we are ready to listen, and the lighthouse, perched on its lonely cliff, whispers still, not with brightness, not with flame, but with the softest reminder. Not all lights are meant to guide us home. Some exist to show us how to let the horizon go. And with that whisper, the world grows still. The sea calms, the mind drifts, and the ancient lighthouse fades gently into silence, its unseen glow carrying you softly towards sleep. The mariners who followed the breath of Wales, that on nights when the moon drifts low over the horizon, turning the ocean into a sheet of silvered glass, the sea begins to remember. The waves soften, the wind quiets, and far below the surface, a long, patient breath rises, like the world exhaling after holding its secrets for too many centuries. Some believe this breath once guided an ancient people, a people whose names dissolve when spoken aloud, as though the ocean itself wishes to keep them. They were the mariners who followed the breath of Wales. Their story begins not with a map, nor with a star, but with a sound, a deep, resonant note that traveled through the bones of their ships, through the lantern-lit decks, through the chests of the sailors who paused their work to listen. A sound that felt older than the sky, older than the moon that softened the waves. A sound that could not be charted or traced, only followed. Some say the first of these mariners were wanderers who lost their way in the fog of forgotten centuries. Others claim they were chosen, drawn out past the reefs, past the known winds, past the boundary where ordinary sailors turn back. But all the whispers agree on one thing. These people believe the whales were guardians of a sacred route, a path through the sea, shaped not by compass or current, but by memory. Mist sits low upon the water, glowing faintly where moonlight brushes its edges. A wooden vessel, darkened by time and salt, glides silently across the sea. No oars break the surface. No voices disturb the stillness. Only the ripple of soft waves against its hull. Above, the sky is wide and unhurried. Stars hang like cold lanterns. Some seem close enough to touch. Others vanish behind passing veils of cloud, leaving the world dim for a heartbeat. Then bright again, as though the heavens themselves are breathing. And through that soft darkness, the sailors wait. They stand along the deck as if attending a ceremony, hands resting lightly on ropes, ears turned not toward the wind, but toward the water. Then it comes, a distant, thunder-soft exhale, a plume of vapor rising tall and pale in the moonlight, like a ghostly torch. The sailors bow their heads, for to them this was not merely a creature of the deep. It was a messenger, a living beacon, the breath of the whale. Whispers tell us that these mariners navigated in ways no other people dared to try. Where most followed stars and wind, they followed sound and silence. Their elders taught that whales carried the memory of underwater mountains, sunken valleys, and oceanic corridors carved by ancient currents. By listening, truly listening, one could feel these memories as faint vibrations along the hull of a ship. It is said their vessels were built differently from all others, not for speed, not for war, but for resonance. Their frames were shaped from woods, chosen for the way they sang when struck. Their sails were woven from fibers that fluttered with a low hum under certain winds. Even the lanterns that lined their decks were crafted to muffle flame, so that no sharp crack or hiss disturbed the sacred silence. For the mariners believed that noise could frighten away the messages of the deep. Some nights, the whales swam close. So close, their massive forms cast shifting shadows beneath the ship. Blue giants, grey elders, pale wanderers, marked by faint scars of journeys too vast to comprehend. Their eyes, dark and steady, held a kind of presence that many described as listening back. The sailors would lean over the rails, palms open, offering nothing but calm breath. No nets, no harpoons, only reverence. Beneath the silence, a song would rise, sometimes low and trembling, sometimes long and mournful, sometimes spiraled with harmonies that felt like the ocean remembering its own creation. These songs were the charts of the mariners, each tone a direction, each echo a warning, each breath a sign. The ceremonies of echo and tide, and among these forgotten people, there were ceremonies before each long voyage. The most sacred was held on shores where smooth stones, rounded by centuries of tides, formed natural amphitheaters. Elders would stand barefoot at the edge of the surf. Children, wrapped in woven cloaks, carried bowls of salt water. And the youngest sailors-to-be approached the waves with quiet steps, dipping their fingers into the water without disturbing its surface. This was called listening to the tide's memory. It was the belief that water retained every sound, every whisper, every secret ever spoken in its presence. By touching it gently, one might hear echoes of journeys yet to be taken. Some believe this ritual was older than their people, older even than recorded time. For the sea carries stories not of decades, but of ages. The journey beside giants, when the mariners sailed, their vessels rarely traveled alone. It was said that whales, sensing the resonance of the ships, or perhaps recognizing their humility, kept pace with them for days or even weeks. The sailors would sleep to the rhythm of those underwater heartbeats. They would rise to the shadow of a fin, cutting elegantly through morning mist. They would eat in silence as a great head surfaced nearby, releasing a plume of warm breath into the cool dawn air. To them, these creatures were not beasts. They were ancient teachers. Some stories say that the mariners believed whales carried celestial knowledge, that their long migrations mirrored patterns of stars, constellations hidden beneath the waves. Others tell us the mariners thought whales guided them towards sacred waters, where the boundary between sea and sky grew thin, and the breath of the world could be heard once more. None of these beliefs were written. They were sung, whispered, passed from memory to memory, like shells passed gently between hands, the vanishing, and then, one day, they were gone. No one agrees on when. No one agrees on how. Only that their ports were found empty, their harbours quiet, their stone markers worn smooth by wind. Some say they followed the whales into waters far beyond any map. drawn by a final, mysterious song. A sound perhaps too deep or too beautiful for the rest of the world to hear. Others believe a great storm carried them away, though no wreckage ever washed ashore. There is a softer belief, murmured by dreamers and sailors who still listen to the ocean late at night, that the mariners did not vanish, but simply completed their journey, that the whales led them to a place where the sea remembers everything, where silence is not emptiness, but fullness, where breath is not merely air but knowledge. Perhaps they arrived in a realm beneath the waves, where light moves slowly, and the boundary between memory and water dissolves like mist at dawn. Or perhaps they transformed into something the sea could hold. Stories, echoes, songs drifting indefinitely through the deep. Tonight, as you drift towards sleep, imagine the ocean again. Imagine the moonlit surface, soft and trembling. Imagine a distant plume of breath rising. Gentle, ancient, patient. Somewhere in that breath is a memory of the mariners. Not their names, not their faces, but the way they listened, the way they trusted the silence, the way they followed the world's deepest rhythm without needing to understand it. Some voices only echo when we are ready to listen. Maybe that is why their story returns now. Slowly, tenderly, like a tide that refuses to be forgotten. Perhaps the whales still wait for those who can hear them. Perhaps the sea still carries the faint outline of a path no chart has ever captured. Perhaps your own dreams, tonight, will drift toward that quiet boundary when night stretches wide and ancient songs move beneath the waves. Where memory fades, and yet something calls. Something soft, something deep, something breathing in the dark. And as sleep gathers around you, let the ocean close gently, let the echoes settle softly, and let the mariners drift onward, forever following the breath beneath the silence of the sea. The gate of tide and stone. Said that in forgotten corners of the world, where the tides breathe more slowly and the moon hangs closer to the water, there lies a threshold built not for human feet, but for the ocean itself. And in the quiet hours before dawn, when the sea exhales its lowest breath, something ancient stirs along the shoreline. A shape rising from the retreating waves, like a memory resurfacing from the deep. Tonight, Dara, let us drift together into that moment. Let us step softly into the legend of the gate of tide and stone. At first, there is only the hush of night, a stretch of shoreline washed smooth by centuries, the faint glimmer of starlight trembling on wet sand. Then, slowly, reverently, the tide pulled back. Not with force, not with the crash of waves, but with a long and gentle sigh, as though the sea has decided to share a secret. From beneath the thinning water, a shape begins to rise. A colossal arch of stone, weathered yet unbroken, emerges from the moonlit surf. Its pillars drip with strands of sea moss. Its carvings shimmer under a thin veil of salt. Spirals, wave glyphs, and oceanic symbols, some sharp as new tide lines, others softened by centuries, stir in the shifting light. It seems less like a structure built by hands and more like a thought carved directly from the sea. As the water drains away, the arch stands fully revealed, its dark frame cutting against the pale horizon. Some believe the sea unveils it only for those who walk with quiet hearts. Others claim the moon chooses the hour, tugging the waters back like the hem of a robe to reveal the forgotten gateway beneath. But most agree on one thing. This gate does not rise for us. It rises for the ocean. Whispers tell us that the people who built this marvel lived in rhythm with the tides, reading them as one might read scriptures or stars. They were a maritime civilization now blurred into the softer chapters of memory. A people of sailors and stone carvers, of moon watchers and tide readers. They believed that the ocean was not a boundary but a visiting spirit, a wanderer who traveled across the world and returned again and again to this sacred shore. And so they built gates, not as entrances for themselves, but as thresholds for the sea. Beneath the silence of night, you can almost imagine those ancient artisans leaning over wet stone, carving spirals that echoed the pulling of the moon, chiseling wave glyphs that captured the movement of water, adding markings so fine that even today they glisten beneath droplets of tide light. It is said some of their symbols were drawn from the patterns of currents, some from the shape of storms, and some, mysteriously, from moons that never rise anymore. These people did not worship the sea. No, their reverence was gentler, more like a conversation than a prayer. The gate of tide and stone was their way of acknowledging that the ocean passed through their land like a great traveling teacher, one who returned with new lessons each time the moon breathed upon the water. The rituals of low tide. When the moon tugged the waters back to their faintest whisper, the people gathered around the rising arch. They came barefoot, their steps softened by layers of wet sand. They carried no torches. Light came from the moon alone, and from the reflections that danced in the shallow pools left behind. In silence, they lined the pathway leading toward the arch. There were no chants, no shouting, no calls to the heavens, only a quiet holding of breath as the sea passed beneath the gate, as though the very spirit of water had come to read the inscriptions they had carved. Some ancient songs say the ocean understood, for when it receded fully, revealing every inch of the carvings, the wet light shimmering across them seemed to shift, as though the symbols awakened only when touched by moonlit water. Priests, or perhaps tidekeepers, stepped forward then. They traced the spirals with their fingertips, feeling the faint hum of meaning within the cold stone. They weren't seeking answers, only harmony, only that subtle sense that the world's breath aligned with their own. The ocean as traveler as we drift deeper into the mystery. Imagine walking beneath that arch tonight. Imagine the stone still warm from the waters that had covered it moments before. Imagine the quiet glow of moonlight catching in the carvings, revealing brief flashes of meaning before fading again into shadow. Where memory fades, the imagination awakens. Some legends say the ocean carried wisdom from distant shores, stories encoded in currents, messages hidden in the rise and fall of us. The gate, then, was a translator, a way for tidekeepers to read what the sea had brought back. Under wet moonlight, inscriptions revealed the shifting patterns of the year, warnings of approaching storms, and sometimes stranger tales, maps of swirling currents that led nowhere, star marks that matched no known sky, symbols etched in spirals tight enough to make the mind drift. Perhaps these were mistakes, or perhaps, as some believe, the sea carried messages from worlds beyond our own. worlds touched by different moons, different tides. Beneath the silence, we feel a soft stirring of awe. The heart of the gate. At the center of the arch there lies a pattern that no scholar has ever fully deciphered. A wide spiral shaped like the turning of a tide. A smaller spiral nested within it. Lines radiating outward like ripples in a still pool. When the tide washes through, these markings gleam as though alive. A fleeting illumination that vanishes the moment the sea returns. Some believe this central symbol was meant to remind the people that the ocean's journey never ends. That every wave, no matter how small, carries part of the world with it. Others say it represents the breath of the earth itself. A slow inhale, a long exhale, carving its own rhythm into the stone. But perhaps the gentlest interpretation comes from an old story, that the spiral is a reminder that everything returns. Water, wind, memory, time. All things circle back to where they began. And so the ocean, in its great wandering, always returns to pass beneath the gate. Not out of obligation, but out of recognition, out of kinship. As the moon climbs higher and the night deepens into its quietest hour, the tide begins its slow return. The first touch of water slides across the sand with the softness of a whisper. Then the pools fill, mirroring the stars above with shimmering clarity. The ocean moves with patience, with ancient familiarity, as though it knows the way by heart. It reaches the base of the arch, curling gently around stone feet, worn smooth by centuries of embrace. Then, inch by inch, it rises. The carving begins to blur under wet light. The spiral loses its sharpness, softening into reflection. The wave glyphs shiver, as though shrouded by memory. Soon the sea reaches the midpoint of the arch, then the top of the pillars, then the curve itself. Within moments, the entire gate begins to sink. Not suddenly, but with the slow dignity of something returning to where it belongs. The water wraps around it like a cloak drawn closed. The moonlight flickers once, twice, across the highest point of the arch. And then, with a low sigh that seems to echo from the stones themselves, the gate of tide and stone slips back beneath the surface, leaving only ripples that fade almost as soon as they appear. We stand at the water's edge, feeling the cool breath of night. The shore is quiet again, as if the gate had never risen at all. Yet the memory lingers, a soft vibration in the chest, a whisper where the sea meets the sand. Perhaps it was never meant to be found. Perhaps the ocean shows it only to those willing to listen to what water murmurs in the dark. Or perhaps, and this is the thought that stays with you long after the tide has risen, some voices only echo when we are ready to hear them. And so the sea returns, and the gate sleeps, and the moon watches, until the next low breath of the tide reveals the secret once more. The legend of the star-lit mast. That somewhere beyond the known routes of sailors, beyond the charts where ink thins into questions, there lies a quiet stretch of ocean that moves as though it dreams. The waves there breathe in a slower rhythm, and the winds seem to kneel before a silence older than storms. And in that hushed expanse, beneath waters tinged with dust-blue light, rests a shipwreck that the world has almost forgotten. Half swallowed by coral and time, its hull has collapsed into softened ribs, like the remains of a creature that once crossed the horizon with purpose. But the mast still stands, tall, weathered, unbroken, a single wooden spine rising through tangled reefs, crowned with sea moss and threaded with soft trails of shimmering sand, and carved along its length, barely visible in the shifting ocean light, are tiny marks that resemble constellations. Some believe these star marks are only decorative etchings, carved by a sentimental sailor longing for home. Others whisper that they glow when touched by moonlight, faint as breath on glass, but bright enough to be seen by those who truly know how to look. Tonight, we drift toward that mast, as though guided by an unseen tide. The sea cradles us. The silence deepens. The legend begins to stir. Opening image. The invitation, imagine the mast first, rising from the ocean like a prayer held above drowning. The water around it shimmers with the pale glow of reflected constellations, as if the sky itself leans close to listen. Coral wraps around the broken deck with gentle insistence, as though reclaiming a secret. A soft current moves through the skeletal remains of the ship, and for a moment, it sounds like breath. A memory exhaling through waterlogged beams. This is where the story of the starlit mast unfolds. Within this quiet ruin, beneath the watching moon, at the threshold between sea dreams and sky memory. Whispers tell us the ship was once called the Horizon's Lyre, though its true name may have been lost long before it sank. Names drift easily across the waves, dissolving where memory fades. But the mast has never stopped speaking. Exploration. The deepening mystery long ago, when night skies were clearer and the stars more familiar to human eyes, there lived a seafaring people who believed the heavens were not distant at all. To them, the constellations were not merely patterns to admire. They were companions, guides, quiet guardians, moving in a slow spiral through forever. It is said these people built ships not to conquer the ocean, but to answer the sky. The crew of the Horizon's Lyre were among the last of this tradition. Sailors who studied starfall patterns as carefully as others studied tides. Navigators who insisted that each star carried a voice. Captains who believed wood could be taught to remember the night. Some stories speak of a ritual performed before each voyage. The crew would gather at the mast under moonlight, touching the wood with fingers dampened by seawater. With each touch, they would hum a tone, low, steady, resonant. Their voices would rise in a slow spiraling harmony, as though tuning the mast to the frequency of the sky. Some claim the mast hummed back. Others say the starlight that fell on the deck lingered longer than it should have, soaking into the wood like ink into parchment. And so, the mast became the heart of the ship. Not merely a structure, but a listener. A kind of bridge between the cosmos above and the moving world below. One navigator described it, though his words come to us only through rumor, as a wooden pillar with the patience of starlight. Another wrote, when meteor showers brushed the horizon, the mast trembled like a string pulled by celestial hands. Perhaps these are exaggerations, or perhaps they are the closest truth ever spoken. Fragments of the voyage. No complete record remains of the ship's final journey. Only fragments carried in the memories of distant coastal villages and in the slow coral-held silence of the wreck itself. Some say the vessel sailed farther west than any before it, chasing a wandering constellation that appeared only once every 1,000 nights. A cluster of pale blue stars known among sky readers as the Stranger's Crown. Others say the crew sought something else entirely. A mythic alignment of falling stars believed to reveal hidden pathways across the ocean. According to old star guides, the heavens occasionally drop hints, thin ribbons of descending light that point toward forgotten islands or submerged mountains. The night readers, as these navigators were called, believed that time itself could be measured by these celestial descents, not in months or seasons, but in moments where light broke through darkness. A rare fall of starlight, to them, was not merely an event. It was an invitation. So when the sky flickered one night with a silver arc of descending brilliance, the crew of the Horizon's Lyre followed it without hesitation. But the ocean is patient, and the sky, though generous, seldom reveals its secrets twice. Storms unfolded, winds rearranged the world, and the ship drifted beyond the reach of known currents. Whether the crew perished in the deep or simply crossed into a world not meant for return, we do not know. What remains is their mast, standing like a promise half kept, still etched with their celestial script. The star marks, each marking on the mast, resembles part of a constellation. A tiny spiral here, a faint cluster there, a delicate line tracing the path of a meteor as though frozen mid-descent. Some carvings appear oceanic, like waves rising toward the heavens. Others are more ancient, resembling symbols found on long-lost star maps. A few glow faintly when the moon is full, though no scientist has yet explained why. Beneath the silence of deep water, the mast retains a soft radiance, not bright enough to illuminate, but enough to suggest remembrance. It is said that those who dive to the wreck at night sometimes hear a faint hum, like a distant echo of sung ritual. Some attribute it to the movement of fish through the coral. Others speak of the wood itself vibrating with an old yearning. Those who listen closely claim the hum matches the pitch of the sky on nights of meteor showers. A trembling, shimmering tone, a tone of longing for a sky that no longer speaks. As we drift deeper into the heart of this legend, a tender sorrow begins to unfold. Imagine the crew, men and women who believed the true direction of their voyage came from above, not below. People who felt more at home under the infinite sky than in any harbor of wood or stone. Their lives were guided by distant lights, ancient and patient. Their stories flowed like slow tides through generations. And now, all that remains of them is a single monk standing in quiet perseverance. Perhaps they understood something we have forgotten. That the heavens once spoke more clearly to those who paid attention, and that wood, like human memory, could be taught to hold light. But time moves, oceans shift, and skies change. Whatever constellation once called to the mast has faded from its position, rearranged by centuries of cosmic drift. The sky no longer sings in the same language, and yet the mast waits. It leans into the dark water, listening still, hopeful, patient, like someone waiting for a friend who promised to return long ago. The fade into silence. Now, as we return from this submerged sanctuary, the waters settle. Moonlight rests gently on the waves, forming soft pathways that dissolve as we watch. The mast recedes behind us, growing smaller, then dimmer, then nothing more than the memory of a slender silhouette rising through coral breath. But the feeling lingers, the sense of longing, of quiet devotion, of a ship that trusted stars more than shorelines. Perhaps the mast, in its patient vigil, reminds us that not all journeys end where we expect. Some drift into places where only memory can reach. Some echo through time like faint constellations, shining for those willing to look upward. And some, like this one, never truly end at all. For even now, in the hush between waves, we can almost feel it. A soft hum rising through water, vibrating through silence, the sound of wood remembering light. Perhaps the mast listens still for a sky that once spoke to it. Perhaps the sky, in ways we cannot hear, remembers too. Or perhaps, as with all ancient stories, it was never meant to be understood fully, only felt. And as sleep approaches, wrapping the world in its own soft tide, we carry with us the lingering glow of that star-marked mast, waiting in eternal patience beneath the moon. A reminder that even in the deepest quiet, light remembers, even when the sea forgets. The songs kept beneath the salt, that in forgotten corners of the sea, far from the crowded trade winds and far from the laughter of familiar shores, there are places where the ocean keeps its own memories, not written on scrolls, not carved in stone, but carried softly in the breath of the tides, like lullabies older than time, sung only when the world around them has grown quiet enough to listen. Tonight, we drift toward one such memory. The invitation begins below the shimmering surface, where the moonlight folds itself into the water like a silver ribbon. Beneath us, the sea is calm, but the darkness below is vast. It stretches out like a cathedral with no pillars, a sanctuary without walls. Only the slow pulse of currents and the ancient quiet that gathers in places untouched for ages. Down where sunlight no longer reaches, shards of broken pottery lie half buried in beds of fine white silt. They rest as though the sea itself placed them gently into sleep. Each fragment is softened by centuries of drifting sand, veiled by whisper-fine grains of salt that cling to their surfaces. And when one is lifted, just so, as though by the hands of a patient storyteller, it reveals something strange. Not writing, not symbols, but patterns. Waves, spirals, gentle strokes that mimic the rise and fall of water. Lines that resemble music. Some believe these markings are merely decorations, nothing more than the handiwork of ancient potters who copied the world they knew. But others hear something deeper in the patterns. They believe the sea has kept a secret hidden in plain sight, an entire language born not of ink, but of sound. In forgotten ages, mariners sailed across these waters, guided not by maps, but by melodies. They were wanderers who trusted in rhythm instead of direction, in memory instead of measurement. Their songs were said to mirror the sea itself, sometimes steady, sometimes wild, always alive. It is whispered that each chant held a memory, and that by singing, a sailor could call forth the wisdom of those who came before. One melody might recall a storm survived, another, an island glimpsed only once beneath a violet dawn, a third, perhaps, a farewell sung across the waves to those who never returned. Their voices echoed across the open water, weaving invisible paths through the mist. When the horizon vanished and the night grew heavy, the mariners would hum softly, letting their songs rise and fall with the breathing of the tide. And the sea would hum back. Beneath the silence of the deep, we drift among the remnants of these forgotten travelers. Amphora handles shaped like coiled waves. Bowls painted with spirals that mimic whirlpools. Slender flutes carved from driftwood, so delicate that the sea preserved them rather than break them apart. It is said the sailors believed music could bind the living to the ocean's shifting heart. A chant could calm a restless wave. A harmony could summon a guiding breeze. And a whispered refrain, sung under a quiet moon, could carry a dream farther than any ship sails. In these waters, songs were more than sound. They were maps. They were prayers. They were memories carried from one generation to the next, long before ink ever touched parchment. And perhaps that is why the pottery fragments bear markings resembling musical notations. They are echoes, faded but not entirely once, of a time when the sea was the great teacher, and its students listened not with their eyes, but with their hearts. We drift deeper. The seabed shifts like a sleeping creature turning in its slumber. Curtains of sand lift gently, revealing new shapes below. More pottery, more patterns, more secrets the ocean once learned and never let go. Here, the water presses in softly, as though urging us to move slowly, to breathe slowly, to let the silence settle around us like a cloak. In the distance, a faint current stirs the remnants of an ancient ship's hull. It has collapsed in on itself, softened by salt and time, but its bones still curve like the ribs of a great whale. On its timbers, faint grooves remain, tiny, delicate, a pattern carved by hands that cherished sound. They form a rhythm, a cadence, a quiet memory. Perhaps it was once the outline of a song. Perhaps it was a message. Perhaps it was simply someone's way of remembering the tide that carried them home, or carried them farther into the vast unknown. Where memory fades and the currents darken, we find an amphora resting upright, as if waiting. Its mouth is half filled with sand. Its body is marked with symbols so delicate they look like breaths frozen in clay. The spirals grow tighter near the base, as though gathering into a single note, a final tone held long after the voice that made it has fallen silent. When the amphora is nudged, a soft plume of silt rises around it, drifting like incense smoke in a temple's quiet hall. It feels for a moment like disturbing a slumbering spirit. This is where the deeper mystery begins to unfold. Historians dismiss these designs as decorative. Archaeologists speak of stylized currents and stylized winds. But sailors, those who have spent long nights listening to the sea, tell a different story. They say these patterns are songs in a language older than any human tongue, a language born of the ocean's own echo, shaped by its tides, carried in its salt, a language that cannot be written, only remembered, only sung. Whispers tell us that long before compasses and star charts, navigators believed melodies could align a vessel with the heartbeat of the world. A chant tuned to the rhythm of the waves could guide a ship safely through swirling waters. Another melody, low and steady, might keep storms at bay. It is said the sea would answer in kind, a rising swell matching a rising chorus, a soft withdrawal of water echoing a fading refrain, a hush falling across the waves as the final verse dissolved into night. Some mariners described moments when their voices drifted back to them, altered, shaped by distance, perhaps, or by something more mysterious, as though the sea itself had taken their song, listened, and returned it gently transformed. Not all songs guided sailors home. Some led them deeper into waters unmapped and unnamed, into realms where the horizon blurred into dream. And some were never meant to be heard again. As we linger in this quiet world beneath the tide, a thought settles like faint dust over stone. Perhaps these songs were not meant to survive in the world above. Perhaps they were destined to dissolve back into salt, returning to the ocean that first inspired them. We drift past a final relic, a curved fragment of clay shaped like the corner of a bowl. Its surface bears the simplest pattern of all, a single spiral, etched with a trembling hand, not perfect, not symmetrical, human, a fragment of longing, a memory of a melody, a whisper left for the sea to keep. And keep it the sea did. When we rise toward the surface, the water grows lighter, the silt grows thinner, the deep quiet fades into the soft murmur of waves brushing one another in the moonlit dark. Above us, the sea stretches wide and still. No chants, no melodies. Only the gentle breathing of the world settling into its nightly rest. Yet something lingers, a faint resonance in the water, a soft hum felt more than heard, a memory not our own, pressed into the heart by currents older than any map. Some voices only echo when we are ready to listen. And tonight, as we drift toward the edge of sleep, we imagine the mariners of ages long lost, humming their way across open waters, trusting in the invisible paths carved by sound. Perhaps their songs were never meant to be found. Perhaps we were only meant to feel them, a chorus kept beneath the salt, a memory held gently by the sea. The tide shifts, the night deepens, the silence settles once more, and the ocean takes back its lullaby. The red sails of the forgotten horizon, that on certain evenings, when the sky dimmed into a muted wash of copper and blue, when the sea lay as still as a breath held in the dark, there appeared sails upon the horizon unlike any ever woven by human hands. They were red, softly glowing as though lit from within, drifting across the boundary where earth, water, and dream met. Some believed they belonged to an ancient maritime order. Others whispered that they were spectres of a past long erased. And tonight, in the quiet cradle of twilight, we return to their story. In forgotten scrolls tucked away beneath coastal ruins, there is a single recurring image, a band of crimson slicing through mist. The old drawings never show the ship itself, only the sail, vast, billowing, and stained the color of darkened embers. The parchment edges are curled like petals burned by time, yet the hue of the sail endures, refusing to fade completely. The chapter begins where sea and sky soften into one blurred horizon. The air is cool, the light dim enough that shapes begin to merge into silhouettes, and shadows gather like patient listeners. Here, in this suspended hour, the red sails are said to first appear. They glide slowly, as if weightless, neither approaching nor receding. They simply exist, half seen, half-sensed, floating along a horizon swallowed by ancient mist. Their glow casts faint reflections across the water, trembling like memories that hesitate before fully returning. In that moment, the world feels thinner, as though the veil between past and present has softened. A gentle hush settles over the sea, a silence so complete it seems woven by unseen hands. And into that silence, the story begins to unfurl. Whispers tell us that the order who sailed beneath those crimson banners was neither entirely mortal nor entirely myth. Their identity has drifted into uncertainty, like smoke dissolving into dusk. Some ancient texts describe them as warriors, guardians of forbidden waters, protectors of rites performed beneath eclipsed moons. Others portray them as patient pilgrims, following a celestial map sketched not upon parchment, but upon the movement of the stars themselves. In forgotten corners of the world, bits of their lore remain buried. A small clay tablet unearthed near an old harbor bears a symbol shaped like a half-opened eye. Another fragment of bronze, softened by centuries of salt, carries spiraled etchings said to represent cloud shadow tides. Scholars debate their meaning, though none can deny the aura of sanctity that clings to them. It is said the sails were dyed using a mixture known only to the order, a moonblood dye made from crushed minerals gathered during nights when the lunar glow turned slightly red. These nights were rare, appearing only when the moon dipped low enough for the sea to drink its color. During such alignments, the order performed slow, silent rituals along the shore, letting the fabric of their sails soak in the celestial tint. The process was said to be as much prayer as craft. The cloth would be stretched across smooth stones, rinsed with tide water, then left beneath the sky until it captured the faintest pulse of the moon's shadow. And when completed, the sails would shimmer like still warm embers, glowing softly against the dark. Some believe the dye itself had a purpose, not decoration, but protection. It may have served as a beacon only visible to the initiated, guiding them through waters where ordinary compasses faltered. Others propose it carried blessings from ancient deities of the tide, marking the ships as vessels of sacred passage. Yet nothing is certain. Much of the truth sank with the centuries. There, navigation of shadows. The navigators of the red sails were said to use a technique now lost, one that relied not on stars alone, but on the shifting geometry of eclipses. They charted paths according to the shadows cast by celestial bodies, reading patterns invisible to ordinary eyes. When moonlight thinned to a silver whisper, they would raise their sails, trusting the subtle pull of a cosmic tide that guided them to places unrecorded on land-bound maps. Travelers along distant coastlines spoke of seeing the ships glide by with unnerving silence. No oars, no lanterns, no sound but the faintest flutter of canvas. They moved like visions trailing the breath of the sea, leaving behind no wake. Where they traveled remains unknown. Some tales claim they carried messages between forgotten kingdoms, crossing waters forbidden to common sailors. Others believe they sought the borders of the world itself, searching for the place where sky dips into ocean in a slow, eternal fold. And still others say the ships appeared only in moments of collective fear, as signs, as omens, as reminders that not all journeys are meant to be followed. Fragments of their story, though their history is shrouded, fragments continue to emerge. A stone altar discovered near an abandoned lighthouse bears traces of red pigment preserved against the wind. On its surface is etched a spiral, tight in its center, widening outward like ripples spreading across still water. This symbol appears in multiple relics associated with the order, always hinting at movement, at journeys undertaken but never quite completed. Another discovery, a wooden beam, blackened from age, recovered from the bottom of a sunken inlet. The grain of the wood holds the faint impression of a sail's edge, as if burned into it by time itself. The shape mirrors the curve drawn in ancient scrolls, confirming the possibility that these ships once truly existed. Yet even with these clues, the narrative remains elusive. Each artifact feels more like a whisper than a declaration, offering only glimpses of a larger truth that refuses to be fully revealed. As the chapter nears its quiet close, we return to the horizon where twilight continues to soften into night. The sea holds a pale glow, like memory settling into a calm rhythm. And there, once more, we see the vision, a single crimson sail drifting across the edge of the world. It moves so slowly that time itself seems to bend around it. The sail brightens for a breath, then dims, as if inhaling the light of the dying day. No figure stands upon its deck. No voice carries across the waves. Only the soft whisper of fabric stirred by a wind older than history. Perhaps these ships were real, crafted by hands whose names have dissolved into dust. Or perhaps they were symbols carried through centuries, representing longings too deep for words. Longings for discovery, for transcendence, for horizons that remain forever just beyond reach. Where memory fades, these sails endure. They belong to a realm between waking and dream, between water and sky. And as we watch the final crimson glow dissolve into dusk, a quiet understanding settles over us. Not all mysteries ask to be solved. Some only ask to be witnessed, to be felt gently, like a whisper against the heart. The last of the light slips below the horizon. The red sail becomes a shadow, then a suggestion, then nothing at all. And yet, something lingers, a faint imprint, an echo of color that refuses to leave the mind. Perhaps it was never meant to be found. Perhaps it was only meant to guide us. Not across the sea, but inward, toward the quiet places where ancient stories sleep. And as night deepens around us, the world grows soft again, folding into silence. The waves glide without sound. The sky darkens with infinite patience. Dreams gather at the edges of thought like sails returning to a familiar shore. And somewhere, far beyond sight, a forgotten horizon waits, holding in its gentle cradle the last glowing memory of the red sails that once drifted through twilight. The mariners who chased the edge of dawn. That in the hour before sunrise, that fragile boundary when the world holds its breath, the sea becomes a mirror for things we were never meant to see. The sky grows pale, not with light, but with anticipation, as if the heavens themselves are recalling an ancient memory. And in that pale, trembling stillness, whispers tell us that a single silhouette sometimes drifts across the quiet water. Not quite a shadow, not quite a vessel, but something caught between the deep and the divine. Tonight, as you settle into the gentle rhythm of your own breath, allow me to guide you toward that horizon, toward a longship gliding silently across a sleeping ocean, toward mariners who chase the edge of dawn, in forgotten corners of the world's old maps, where sea serpents and swirling winds once guarded the unknown. There is a story carved into the margins, a story that begins with the shape of a ship, barely visible, slipping across silver blue waters that seem too calm, too reflective, too still to be ordinary. Picture it. A lone longship carved from dark, time-worn timber. The wood is inscribed with runes smoothed by salt and seasons, glowing faintly in the half-light. The mast rises like a prayer, thin and unwavering, crowned by a tattered pennant that does not yet know which way the wind will choose to breathe. All around, the ocean lies vast and unbroken. No oars disturb it. No voices rise from the ship's deck. The vessel simply glides forward, moved by something more ancient than wind. Some say this is only an illusion, a trick of mist and rising light. Others whisper that it is a memory drifting through time, searching for a listener. But for those who knew the story of the mariners who chased the edge of dawn, this silhouette was a promise, a sign that somewhere between night and the coming day, truth could be found that had no names. It is said that these foreigners belonged to a forgotten coastal people who lived in quiet devotion to the horizon. Their villages were simple. Huts tucked between cliffs and tide pools, surrounded by spiraled stone markers that aligned with the rising sun across seasons. Each morning, as dawn approached, the air was filled with an almost sacred expectation, for they believed dawn was not merely a time of day. To them, the edge of dawn was a veil, thin, shimmering, unsteady, a boundary between worlds, a place where truths normally hidden from human sight softened enough to be glimpsed. And so, generation after generation, they built longships not for trade, nor war, nor travel, but for communion with the horizon's first breath. They called themselves the Wanderers of the Pale Light. Their sails were woven with threads dyed in faded copper and sea blue, colors meant to blend with both the ocean and the sky. For they believed the dawn would only reveal itself to those who approached with humility. Whispers tell us of the rituals they performed at the cusp of day. They would gather on the sand in silence, their faces turned toward the east. No drums, no chanting, no fire. Only breath and stillness. Each mariner dipped their fingers into the cold ocean, lifting a droplet to their forehead, a gesture that symbolized waking the mind as the sun woke the world. Some say they also carried scrolls of star maps inked with silver, rolled tightly and wrapped in cloth, though no scroll has ever been found. Then, as the sky softened from deep blue to pale grey, the crew would whisper small prayers into the morning air. Prayers not for safety nor wealth, but for sight. The ability to perceive what lay beyond the horizon's illusion. Marked by the moon, they would say, touching their brow. Carried by the tide, they would murmur, closing their eyes. Unveiled by the dawn, they would breathe, stepping aboard their waiting vessel. When the first faint thread of gold touched the water, the ship would push off silently. And so began the chase. Beneath the silence of early morning, the mariners sailed toward the thin line where the sky met the sea. Every stroke of the oars was slow, deliberate, rhythmic, not a race, but a ceremony. They believed that the horizon was alive, that it moved not because of distance or curvature, but because it chose to reveal or conceal its secrets. Chasing the edge of dawn meant chasing a moving doorway. Some claimed that when the light was just right, when the sea was calm and the mariners' hearts were steady, the horizon shimmered like a curtain being drawn back. They said shapes appeared, cities made of cloud and gold, statues rising from the water, pathways of light where no land should exist. Others believed the mariners saw not visions, but memories of the world's earliest days, a time when gods walked openly and the oceans had voices. There were even tales of a moment, rare and precious, when a mariner could lean over the ship's railing, look into the pale water, and see not their reflection, but the face of someone they had lost. Whether these were truths or only the dreams of a tired people, no one can say. But those who returned from the journey always returned changed, quieter, gentler, with a softness in their gaze that seemed to hold both light and longing. Over centuries, as new generations forgot the old beliefs, the practice of chasing dawn drifted into obscurity. The coastal villages crumbled. The spiraled markers fell. Longships that once glimmered with pride were left to decay in dry docks swallowed by grass and sea salt wind. Somewhere along the way, the last mariner pushed off alone, rowing toward the thinning veil of dawn, while the world behind him no longer remembered why. It is said no one saw the ship return. No one heard the whisper of oars or saw the sails shimmer in first light. Perhaps he crossed the threshold. Perhaps he simply drifted until the tide carried him elsewhere. Perhaps the horizon opened for him one final time. Or perhaps, as some believe, the dawn simply claimed what had always belonged to it. Imagine now, Dara, the final moments of this drifting tale. The sky is brightening. The longship's silhouette is growing faint. The sun, rising slow and patient, begins to spill its warmth across the sea. Every ripple glows gold. Every shadow melts into day. The ship, the mast, the oars, the runes, all dissolve into the widening light until nothing remains but water stretching endlessly, peacefully, quietly toward morning. Perhaps the mariners reached what they longed to find. Perhaps the horizon finally revealed its last secret. Or perhaps the ship was nothing more than a breath drawn between moments. A story carried by tides and memory. A reminder that not all journeys follow roads or stars. Some follow questions. Where memory fades, the sea remains. Where silence settles, dawn continues its slow, eternal unveiling. And somewhere, in a place between waking and dreaming, a longship still glides across pale waters, always chasing a horizon that drifts just beyond reach, always seeking the soft, sacred truth that lies at the edge of dawn. As you drift towards sleep, let the image settle gently inside you. Let the calm waters cradle your thoughts. Let the rising light soften the edges of your day. For some voices only echo when we are ready to listen, and some journeys continue long after the traveler has closed their eyes. The sleepwalkers of the tidal moon, where the world forgets its edges and night teaches the sea to whisper. It is said that on rare nights, when the moon hangs low and swollen with secret light, the ocean below turns to liquid silver. Not blue, not black, not the storm-dark hue of restless waves, but silver like poured metal, slow-moving and sacred. On those nights, the surf does not roar or crash or gnaw at the sand. It sighs, as though the sea itself has grown tired of being awake. Beneath that luminous hush, the shoreline becomes a mirror, and the sky bends down to greet its own reflection. The air tastes older, as if heavy with the breath of time. And then, though no footsteps approach, no figures are seen, and no voices break the stillness, footprints begin to form in the wet sheen of silvered sand. Soft depressions, mortal in shape, moon-marked in shadow. Whispers tell us that these were the signs, the traces of wanderers born of tide and dream. The ones called the sleepwalkers of the tidal moon. Some claimed they were mariners, lost to the waves, returned only in spirit. Others believed they were alive still, caught between worlds, walking through dreams that leaked into waking. Yet beneath the silence, where legends grow their roots, an older story stirs. Myth, memory, salt on moonlight, long before maps were carved into bark or pressed onto parchment, long before compasses pierced the great unknown. The oceans belonged not to sailors, but to listeners. These sleepwalkers, it is said, did not learn the sea. The sea learned them. They sailed not by stars alone, but by the pull of something unseen. Inner tides that rose and fell in rhythm with the moon. Some believe that beneath their ribs, where the heart keeps its quiet drum, the tides of their blood matched the turning of the earth. That their dreams served as rudders, their breath as wind, their longing as compass. They were the mariners of the in-between, whispers the salt in the wind, not awake, not asleep, but carried. Fishermen spoke of seeing them from afar, long ships drifting silently across moonlit waters, sails full, though no wind stirred. Not a shout, not a chant, not an oar breaking the surface. Just a steady forward motion, as though the ocean itself bore them along in her palms. And always, always, their ships moved with the tide, never against it. Perhaps they followed currents mapped only in the dreaming mind. Perhaps they heard the ocean's hidden voice. Or perhaps, as some dared to murmur by dying firelight, they had become something more than human, half water, half wakefulness, guided not by sight, but by remembrance older than bone. The tides of the heart, a rhythm older than breath. In forgotten corners of coastal lore, there are tales of sailors who fell into dreamlike trances, standing at the helm with eyes open but seeing nothing. Their breathing slowed, their pulse steadied, their fear fell away. Some returned from those states with no memory, some with memories that were not their own, and some did not return at all. It is said the sleepwalkers were once ordinary seafarers who listened too closely to the hush of the waves. They let the ocean speak, and the sea, recognizing kinship, spoke back. For who among us does not carry water inside? Who is not shaped by tides from birth? We are, all of us, tuned to lunar pull. Oceans in miniature, our blood echoing the moon. Perhaps the difference between ourselves and the sleepwalkers is only that they remembered. The navigation of intuition, where science dissolves into sensation, modern scholars, tracing fragments of maritime puzzles, suggest the possibility of navigators who felt their way across waters through pressure and instinct. As animals sense earthquakes, as birds sense storms, perhaps humans once sensed oceans. We navigate our lives by currents of intuition, glimpses, impressions. We say, I feel drawn, I feel pulled. I feel cold. What if such phrases were once literal? What if these sleepwalkers simply knew what the body never truly forgets? That every human is born of tide, bathed first in water, lulled by the hush of waves within the womb. In the hush of night, when the world is dimmed and the senses unwind, we too drift between waking and dream, the borderland the sleepwalkers once called home. There, thought becomes tide, memory becomes mist, and the moon, the ancient silver clock, keeps time over worlds seen and unseen. A shoreline erased by dawn as the story drifts toward its final hush. We return to that silvered beach where the footprints began. The moon hangs lower now, no longer full and commanding, but softened behind a veil of traveling clouds, as though even celestial bodies must sometimes rest. The water draws close, not hurried, not hungry, just inevitable. Wave by gentle wave, the sea reclaims what is hers. The footprints soften, blur, disappear, not erase, but returned. For perhaps it was never meant as evidence, never offered as proof. Perhaps the sleepwalkers of the tidal moon left no message other than the reminder that some steps are taken not with the feet, but with the soul. Where memory fades, where silence grows deep enough to listen, there are paths we follow without knowing why. We are pulled by voices without sound. We arrive at shores we never meant to reach. And when we awaken, the dream lingers like salt on the tongue. Some voices only echo when we are ready to hear. The clouds drift further, concealing the moon entirely now, like a lantern slowly shuttered. The sea is dark again, the mirror closed. Night returns to its hush, and as sleep draws near, quiet, gentle, tidal. You may wonder whether the sleepwalkers were ever real, or whether they were born only of longing and imagination. But perhaps the truth lies not in what history declares, but in what your heartbeat still remembers. The tide within you, steady and ancient, marking time beneath bone and breath. As the last of the silver fades from the sand and the ocean resumes its timeless rhythm, one thought settles like mist upon the shoreline. Maybe the line between reality and dream was never a line at all. And so the story drifts away, like a ship guided by no wind, following currents unseen. Its wake dissolving, its memory softening, until only the gentle rhythm of the tide remains, not ending, only fading. For some tales, like the moon, do not vanish. They simply move beyond sight.